Well, I joined the Patriotic Millionaires the instant I heard about them because I was so tired of being characterized as a traitor in various ways, a traitor to my class, a traitor to my family, a traitor even to my country, when actually what I believed was that without some fearless and provocative and inconvenient and frankly constant interruption, the American economy was just going to continue grinding down poor people. At the time, it seemed clear to me and to everyone in Patriotic Millionaires that the economic system was kind of on a one-way trip to hell. Given the gulf between the rich and poor now today and the indifference with which that gulf is greeted by the uber wealthy, the only decent course of action at this point would seem to be a healthy amount of betrayal. Most of the time, I'm too polite for "I'm told you so's," but I hope you'll forgive me indulging in at least a few, being that we're here at the World Bank, and given that we find ourselves navigating a political and economic set of realities which are shocking, even if none of them is particularly surprising. How could anyone not be a volcano of "I told you so's" at a moment like this? I will leave to others more qualified than I the job of pointing out how corrosive it is to any political system to have extreme wealth and obscene wealth stacked up so high on one end of the spectrum, and I'll leave it to others to describe how that is affecting the likelihood that we will have any positive impact on the slipping environment. I can only speak to my own experience. I grew up in a family with wealth, and it was a family that decided to take the wealth it had and turn it into more wealth. So my thesis statement, it's this: there is such a thing as too much money, and it's bad for the world for sure, but it's also bad for the people who own it, no matter how counterintuitive that might sound. It is painful, soul-crushing, alienating, and morally corrosive for the people who own it. What I want to describe to you is very concrete. I have witnessed it myself and in the people I love most in the world, but don't assume that because it's personal, it's not serious. The opposite is true. In fact, the personal nature of some of these observations is precisely what should concern us about the effect of wealth on the behavior and the beliefs of the people who have it. So this isn't just about one family. This is about wealthy families in general, inheriting wealth in particular, and holding or hoarding a great deal of wealth. If you listen to the meanderings of some of our more vocal billionaires with a little bit of psychological literacy, you will learn many of the highly personal things that have shaped them. Their granular struggles, small as they may seem, have everything to do with the political and economic realities we're trying to confront with coherence and fairness. I'm not just talking about the billionaire poster children, though. We need to take a long, hard look at the ways in which the mere multi-hundred millionaire or multi-10 millionaire, even well-meaning and decent people, can lose their bearings so quickly and so easily with far less wealth. One of the first things that falls by the wayside amid the distractions of wealth is empathy. It starts very small and it starts very young. Maybe your family has a maid or a housekeeper who works all day and then goes to sleep after you, but in the morning when you wake up is there with a hot breakfast. It's a pretty mundane fact of life in a lot of families that aren't really all that wealthy. But it took me years to wonder how much sleep this housekeeper was getting in a very dank, very tiny room that we sent her off to every night. Did she want a real whole weekend instead of just the Sunday afternoon that her husband picked her up for to take her to church? For all of the Sunday sermons and lessons about kindness we were served up as children, somehow this one thing was happening right under our notice, and it escaped our notice. This is not anything anyone does on purpose, but God protect the child, speaking from experience, who asks after the well-being of the housekeeper. She will learn fast that empathy, evenly applied, is a fly in the ointment no one wants to deal with. The most well-meaning child on earth will, more often than not, look past the problem of the housekeeper, what the housekeeper may or may not be up to, what she's paid, after all, and she's paid to be pleasant. And it is next to impossible, once you have come to think of her work as normal, as compared to your own, to imagine that the people endowed with less money than you have are nevertheless just fine with the way it's all going. Again, this might seem like a small thing, but isn't that how erosion begins? First a small rock, then a hunk of a hillside, then the whole mountain. You might begin to think of you and your housekeeper as made from different material, of being entirely distinct from one another. And so soon empathy gives way to its inferior stepsister sympathy, which asks nothing of you, forgives everything you miss, and makes you very comfortable with the idea that there's nothing wrong with the difference between you and all the other hardworking people you drive by every day. If you're unlucky enough to have been saddled with a strong sense of fairness, the stark difference between you and everyone you walk by serves as a constant assault on your senses. And so what often comes along with a wealthy life is terrible isolation. In my case, as a child, I was told not to trust anyone, that people would take advantage of me, they would want to hurt me, and there was great danger out there where people lived. And my parents weren't entirely wrong about that, but they were also not entirely right. And what they didn't offer, along with the warnings, was a solid sense about how to know the difference. Over the past few decades, I've watched as the increasingly exalted 1% have crafted ever more creative, special, and private spaces for themselves, partially to shield themselves from people who do in fact want to rob and or kidnap them, but more than anything to prevent themselves from having to come face to face with the real world any more than is absolutely necessary. But there is so much silence and alienation in those separate spaces. The people out there are less and less legible to you. And so the doom loop circles back to tell you that you are, in fact, different from everyone else. The self-segregation that the wealthy tend to build for themselves is a consequence of a problematic tendency, for sure, but it also becomes, in and of itself, another perverse influence on their fundamental nature. And how easily does the idea of other transmogrify into the far more palatable idea of being special or entitled to all this special treatment. In a world where you are special, your wants and needs take precedence over the wants and needs of ordinary people. Your wants, in fact, are increasingly mistaken for needs. At the same time as empathy ebbs in you, the healthcare or housing or food so genuinely needed by ordinary people out there just don't seem all that pressing. They will find a way. They always do. They are, after all, what Hilda Doolittle called them, the sturdy, unkillable infants of the very poor. Alone in your bunker, you can find yourself surrounded mainly by people who serve you. Often you have cast aside the difficult people who tell you unpleasant things, people like honest friendships, first wives, and blunt offspring. The people around you come to seem like friends, of course. They are always very nice, but there are two problems with them. First, they will never tell you the truth about anything if it involves any kind of risk to the structure that holds up their lives and your life. And they are trained, educated, they are practically brainwashed into believing only one thing about money, and that is that the only good money is more money. Don't spend the principal. If you want to give, start a foundation and don't touch the corpus. If you have children, you must leave each of them off better than you started, no matter where they started. There is only one answer to every question, and the answer is more. For a person whose sense of his own value rises from the idea of his wealth, more money can certainly look like more value. For that person to be surrounded by people whose only thought is for him to have more money it's hard to imagine where he might go to think creatively about what his money is actually for. One day you find that everyone around you is in awe of you. This is better than heroin. Who would not say no to that? You're surrounded by fans. That only sounds fun, of course, if you've never actually been famous. Because a fan is just a person that knows not you but an idea of you, does not understand who you actually are, and who, if they saw that ugly portrait you're keeping in your attic, would run shrieking in the other direction. Fans are very nice because their gaze reflects you back to yourself at twice your natural size, half your actual age, and far less bald than the last time you looked in the mirror. It can be quite addictive. So what does all this have to do with income inequality and the World Bank? Everything. Again and again, our most visible billionaires, because of this or some other combination of corrosive forces, and I have only named a few, because they believe that they are really that special and entitled, have held forth with their own incoherent, self-driven political theses and public behaviors that can only be described as childlike and even feral. Few examples of the messy, self-justifying political visions foisted upon the public by our uber-wealthy tech billionaires is more ironic and nearly comical than Mark Andreessen's ideas about what he calls the deal. But more, there are Peter Thiel's needy warnings about the Antichrist, Sam Altman's wish that instead of talking about socialism, we could just talk about everyone else being as rich as he is, Elon Musk's wish that we could put empathy in the rearview mirror. The examples go on and on. These men are welcome to their unintentional self-revelations, their insecurity, and their sophistry. What they are not welcome to is the keys to our democracy. Lives are quite literally depending upon us taking away those keys, and that will start with finding a way to get money out of politics and deciding that there is a level of wealth beyond which only madness lies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abby.